September 12, 1943. Balale Airstrip, Solomon Islands. The morning briefing would never capture what Japanese fighter pilots witnessed in the skies that day. 24 F-4U Corsairs climbing through 10,000 feet, led by a 31-year-old Marine major the Americans called Pappy. Through the crystalline Pacific air, Major Gregory Boyington's voice crackled over squadron radios with an order that defied every tactical manual written about fighter escort missions. "Black Sheep, we're going hunting." For 2 years, Japanese Zero pilots had dominated these same skies. Their Mitsubishi fighters, lighter, more agile, piloted by veterans with thousands of combat hours, had carved through American squadrons like paper. Every engagement followed the same brutal pattern. Americans flew defensively. Japanese pilots controlled the initiative. The kill ratios spoke for themselves. But the Corsair wasn't built like other American fighters. 18 cylinders, 2,000 horsepower. A propeller so massive it forced the landing gear into an inverted gull-wing design that looked like a mistake. The Japanese had dismissed it as another clumsy American brute. Too heavy, too fast to dogfight. Built for straight-line speed, not aerial combat. They were about to discover what happens when 28 enemy aircraft fall to a single Marine pilot, and why an entire Air Force would learn to fear one man's name. Major Gregory Boyington throttled back his Corsair as the formation approached 22,000 feet, the Pacific stretching endlessly below like hammered steel. 4 months earlier, he had been flying with the American Volunteer Group in China, downing Japanese fighters over the Burma Road. Now, at 31, he found himself commanding Marine Fighting Squadron 214, a collection of replacement pilots, misfits, and veterans that the Corps had assembled from whatever was available. They called themselves the Black Sheep, and today would mark their baptism by fire. The mission brief had been straightforward. Escort 24 SBD Dauntless dive bombers to Balal, a Japanese airstrip carved from coral and jungle on the southern tip of the Shortland Islands. Intelligence reported moderate fighter opposition, perhaps a dozen Zeros operating from the field. What intelligence had not reported was the presence of 48 Japanese fighters that had staged through Balal the previous evening, refueled and rearmed for morning patrols. Boyington keyed his radio transmitter, his voice cutting through the static that plagued long-range communications in the humid Pacific air. "Bandits, 12 o'clock high. Zeros coming down from 25,000. He counted the diving aircraft, their distinctive silhouettes unmistakable against the morning sky. 24 enemy fighters in the initial wave, with more climbing behind them. The numbers were even, but numbers had never told the complete story in aerial combat. The Corsair had arrived in the Pacific Theater carrying a reputation as a widowmaker. Its massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine generated 2,100 horsepower at takeoff, driving a 13-foot, 4-inch Hamilton Standard propeller that demanded respect from even experienced pilots. The inverted gull-wing design, necessary to provide adequate ground clearance for that enormous propeller, had initially drawn skepticism from Navy and Marine aviators accustomed to conventional configurations. Early test pilots had reported severe stall characteristics, unpredictable ground handling, and a tendency toward pilot-induced oscillation that had killed more than one aviator during training. But Boyington understood what others had missed. The Corsair was not built to dogfight like a Zero. It was engineered to exploit different tactical principles entirely. Where the Mitsubishi A6M relied on maneuverability and pilot skill to win turning engagements, the Corsair possessed advantages in speed, climb rate, and diving performance that could negate Japanese tactical doctrine when properly employed. The key was refusing to fight on Japanese terms. The first Zero pilot committed to his attack run, diving toward the bomber formation with the confidence that had characterized Japanese fighter tactics since Pearl Harbor. Boyington rolled inverted and pulled his Corsair into a steep dive, building speed rapidly as the two aircraft converged. At 400 yards, he triggered a short burst from his 650 caliber Browning machine guns, the combined fire delivering nearly 4,000 rounds per minute. The Zero's engine exploded in a shower of coolant and metal fragments, the aircraft tumbling earthward, trailing black smoke. Lieutenant Stan Bailey, flying Boyington's wing, called out another Zero attempting to bracket them from the left. Bailey's Corsair accelerated past 350 miles per hour in a diving turn that would have torn the wings from a lighter aircraft. His guns found their target at 200 yards, the Zero disintegrating under the impact of armor-piercing incendiary ammunition that punched through aluminum structure as though it were paper. The engagement developed into a vertical battlefield spanning 8,000 feet of Pacific sky. Japanese pilots, trained in the tradition of aerial samurai combat that emphasized individual skill and aircraft maneuverability, found themselves facing opponents who refused conventional dogfighting tactics. Every time a Zero pilot attempted to turn with a Corsair, the American aircraft would accelerate away, climb rapidly, then return with superior energy for another high-speed attack. The Japanese could not catch the Corsairs in a climb, could not follow them in a dive, and could not force the turning engagement that might have neutralized American advantages. Captain John McNeely, leading the 2nd Division of Black Sheep fighters, spotted a formation of Zeros attempting to bypass the main engagement and attack the dive bombers directly. McNeely's tactical radio crackled as he coordinated with his wingman, rolling into a high-side attack that brought his division down on the Japanese fighters at a 45-degree angle. The Corsairs struck like thunderbolts, their combined firepower shredding 2 Zeros before the Japanese pilots realized they were under attack. The bombers, protected by this aerial umbrella, pressed their attack against Balel Airfield. From 22,000 feet, Boyington could see the SBDs rolling into their dives, releasing their 1,000-pound bombs with precision that spoke to months of training in the clear skies over Hawaii and California. Secondary explosions erupted across the airfield as fuel dumps and ammunition storage areas absorbed direct hits. Whatever aircraft remained on the ground would not be flying combat missions for weeks. But the air battle continued. Japanese reinforcements arrived from Bougainville and Choiseul, adding another 24 fighters to an engagement that had already exceeded anything the Black Sheep had experienced. The sky filled with contrails and smoke, radio frequencies jammed with position reports, and tactical calls as 48 American and Japanese aircraft maneuvered for advantage across a combat area that stretched for 30 miles. Boyington's tactical experience, earned over 2 years of combat in China and the Pacific, proved decisive. He had learned that successful fighter operations required more than individual pilot skill. Victory came through coordinated tactics that maximized aircraft capabilities while minimizing enemy advantages. The Corsair's superior speed and climb rate meant nothing if pilots allowed themselves to be drawn into slow-speed turning battles where Zero agility could dominate. "Black Sheep, maintain your speed," Boyington transmitted as he watched 2 of his pilots begin to turn with pursuing Zeros. "Use your climb rate. Make them fight your fight." The tactical doctrine was simple, but demanded discipline that separated veteran pilots from those who would not survive their first month of combat. The engagement lasted 37 minutes. When the last Japanese fighter broke contact and retired toward Bougainville, 5 enemy aircraft had been confirmed destroyed with no American losses. The bombers returned to their base at Munda with minor damage and full bomb bay doors. Mission accomplished. But for Boyington, the tactical lessons of Balal represented something more significant than a single successful mission. The Black Sheep had proven that American pilots, properly trained and equipped with superior aircraft, could engage elite Japanese fighter units on equal terms and emerge victorious. The psychological implications would extend far beyond the immediate tactical results, creating doubt within Japanese fighter squadrons that had dominated Pacific skies since the war began. October 17, 1943 dawned clear over Bougainville, the volcanic peak of Mount Bagana, visible from 60 miles as Boyington led 24 Corsairs north toward Kahili Airfield. 5 weeks had passed since the Balal mission, and the Black Sheep had flown 18 combat sorties, establishing a reputation that extended beyond American air bases to Japanese command posts throughout the Solomons. Intelligence reports intercepted by Allied cryptographers indicated that Japanese pilots had begun referring to Marine Fighting Squadron 214 by name, an unprecedented recognition that suggested the psychological impact of their tactical success was exceeding even optimistic projections. The mission parameters appeared routine: sweep Kahili airfield, engage any airborne opposition, and provide cover for a photographic reconnaissance aircraft tasked with documenting recent Japanese construction activities. What Allied intelligence had failed to detect was the presence of 48 Japanese fighters that had staged through Kahili during the night, representing the largest concentration of enemy aircraft assembled for a single engagement since the previous spring's Operation Oi-Go. The Japanese 11th Air Fleet, commanded by Vice Admiral Junichi Kosaka, had committed resources from 3 separate air groups in an attempt to break the growing dominance of American fighter units operating from newly captured bases in the Central Solomons. At 26,000 feet, visibility extended beyond 100 miles in the crystal-clear air that characterized Pacific high-pressure systems. Boyington could distinguish individual coral atolls scattered across the Solomon Sea, their white beaches contrasting sharply with the cobalt blue of deep water. Below and ahead, the irregular coastline of Bougainville emerged from morning haze, its jungle-covered ridges and volcanic peaks creating thermal updrafts that would complicate low-altitude maneuvering for both American and Japanese aircraft. The first indication of massive enemy presence came from Lieutenant Robert McClurg, flying tail-end Charlie in the Black Sheep formation. McClurg's voice cut through radio static with urgent precision. "Skipper, multiple bandits climbing from Kahili. Count 2-4, make that 3-6 bogeys, Angels 22, and climbing." Boyington acknowledged the sighting, simultaneously calculating tactical options while scanning the sky ahead. Japanese fighters were ascending in 3 distinct formations, their polished aluminum surfaces flashing in morning sunlight as they gained altitude for energy advantage. The tactical situation demanded immediate decision. Conventional fighter doctrine called for maintaining altitude advantage, forcing enemy aircraft to expend energy climbing, while American fighters retained the initiative through superior positioning. But Boyington recognized that numerical disadvantage, 24 against 48, required unconventional approach. The WAP, Corsair's superior dive performance and structural strength, could be exploited through tactics that deliberately surrendered altitude advantage in exchange for speed and surprise. "Black Sheep, we're going down," Boyington transmitted, pushing his aircraft into a steep diving attack that built airspeed rapidly past 400 miles per hour. The formation followed in echelon, each pilot maintaining visual contact with his leader while monitoring airspeed indicators that climbed steadily toward redline limitations. At 350 miles per hour, the Corsair became a guided missile, its massive engine and robust airframe, enabling attack profiles that would have destroyed lighter aircraft. The first wave of Japanese fighters climbing through 24,000 feet in a loose V formation found themselves under attack from above and behind before their leaders could issue tactical warnings. Boyington's guns opened at 600 yards, his tracers arcing through clear air to converge on the lead Zero's engine compartment. The Sakai radial engine, cooled by ram air and lacking armor protection, exploded under the impact of 50 caliber armor-piercing rounds. The Zero rolled inverted and began a death spiral that would carry it 23,000 feet to the jungle floor below. Lieutenant Stan Bailey, maintaining position on Boyington's wing, selected a Zero, attempting to turn inside the American attack. Bailey's tactical experience, accumulated over 4 months of combat flying, had taught him to recognize the precise moment when Japanese maneuverability advantages became liabilities. The Zero pilot, executing a maximum performance climbing turn, had reduced his airspeed to barely 140 miles per hour, slow enough that Bailey's diving Corsair could match his turn rate while maintaining energy for escape. Bailey's guns fired for 2 seconds, delivering enough ammunition to sever the Zero's port wing at the root. The Japanese aircraft tumbled earthward, its pilot trapped in a cockpit that would not respond to control inputs. The engagement expanded rapidly as additional Japanese formations joined the battle, creating a 3-dimensional combat area that stretched across 15 miles of airspace above the northern Solomons. Radio frequencies became saturated with position reports, tactical calls, and emergency transmissions as nearly 70 aircraft maneuvered for advantage in the clear morning sky. Contrails marked high-altitude maneuvers while smoke trails indicated aircraft damage, creating a visible record of tactical development that could be observed from ships 40 miles away. Captain McNeely, leading the 2nd Division of Black Sheep fighters, identified a tactical opportunity that exemplified the coordinated approach that distinguished American fighter operations from individual combat techniques favored by Japanese pilots. A formation of 12 Zeros, attempting to establish position for attack against the American bombers they expected to follow the fighter sweep, had organized themselves in a defensive circle at 18,000 feet. The Japanese tactic, known as the Lufbery Circle, normally provided mutual protection through overlapping fields of fire that could break up attacking formations. McNeely coordinated with his wingman through hand signals, rolling into a high-side attack that brought his division down through the Japanese circle at a steep angle. The Corsairs' superior diving speed enabled them to penetrate the defensive formation before Japanese pilots could establish firing solutions, disrupting the tactical cohesion that made the Lufbery Circle effective. McNeely's guns found their target at 300 yards, exploding a Zero's fuel tank in a fireball visible from 20 miles. His wingman, Lieutenant Chris Magee, destroyed a second Zero before the formation could reorganize. The tactical development continued for 38 minutes, with individual engagements occurring across multiple altitude levels simultaneously. Japanese pilots, trained in traditional dogfighting techniques that emphasized aircraft maneuverability and pilot skill, found themselves fighting an opponent that refused conventional aerial combat. Every attempt to force turning engagements resulted in American aircraft accelerating away, climbing rapidly, then returning with energy advantages that negated Japanese tactical doctrine. Boyington's kill count reached 11 confirmed aircraft by the time the last Japanese fighters broke contact and withdrew toward their bases on Choiseul and New Georgia. The Black Sheep had achieved complete tactical victory, destroying 20 enemy aircraft without sustaining a single loss. More significantly, they had demonstrated that numerical superiority could be negated through superior tactics, coordinated teamwork, and aircraft capabilities that exceeded Japanese specifications in crucial performance areas. The psychological impact of the Kahili engagement extended beyond immediate tactical results. Japanese pilots returning to their bases carried reports of American fighter performance that contradicted everything their training had taught them about enemy capabilities. The Invincible Zero, master of Pacific skies since Pearl Harbor, had been systematically outfought by aircraft that Japanese intelligence had dismissed as inferior. Fear began to replace confidence in veteran pilots who had never experienced comprehensive tactical defeat on such a massive scale. The intelligence briefings that reached Japanese air bases throughout the Solomon Islands during November 1943 carried an unprecedented level of detail about a single American pilot. Flight reports from surviving Zero pilots described tactical maneuvers that defied established doctrine, aircraft performance that exceeded known specifications, and most disturbing of all, a coordinated fighting style that transformed individual American fighters into components of a larger weapon system. Major Gregory Boyington's name appeared in Japanese operational reports with increasing frequency, accompanied by detailed analyses of his tactical methods and increasingly desperate recommendations for countermeasures. Captain Tadayoshi Koga, stationed at Rabaul with the 253rd Kokutai, had flown against American fighters since the opening days of the Pacific War. His personal victory count stood at 19 confirmed kills, earned through 2 years of combat that had taken him from Pearl Harbor to the Coral Sea to the grinding attrition battles over Guadalcanal. Koga understood aircraft performance parameters, pilot psychology, and tactical doctrine with the expertise that separated elite aviators from replacement pilots who survived measured in weeks rather than months. What he could not understand was how a single American squadron had fundamentally altered the tactical balance in the Central Solomons. The operational reports crossing Koga's desk painted a picture of systematic Japanese defeat that contradicted everything his experience had taught him about American fighter capabilities. On November 3rd, Marine Fighting Squadron 214 had intercepted a formation of 26 Japanese aircraft over Empress Augusta Bay, destroying 8 Zeros while losing none of their own. November 9th, 12 American fighters engaged 18 Japanese aircraft near Choiseul, resulting in 7 confirmed Japanese losses against 0 American casualties. November 15th, Boyington personally shot down 3 Zeros during a single engagement, bringing his confirmed kill total to 26 aircraft. The numbers themselves told only part of the story. Japanese pilots returning from encounters with the Black Sheep reported tactical innovations that suggested American fighter doctrine had evolved beyond anything Japanese intelligence had anticipated. The Corsairs operated in coordinated pairs that maintained mutual support through complex 3-dimensional maneuvers, never allowing individual aircraft to become isolated where Japanese numerical superiority could be brought to bear. When engaged by superior numbers, American formations would divide, forcing Japanese pilots to split their attention between multiple threats, while American aircraft exploited the confusion to establish firing positions. Lieutenant General Ota Masahiko, commanding officer of the 6th Air Army's fighter operations in the Northern Solomons, had received direct orders from Admiral Yamamoto's successor to develop countermeasures against Marine Fighting Squadron 214 specifically. The tactical situation had deteriorated to the point where Japanese bomber operations required fighter escort ratios of 3-to-1. And even then, mission success rates had fallen below acceptable parameters. OTA's staff officers had analyzed captured film from gun cameras, interviewed surviving pilots, and consulted with aircraft manufacturers about potential American technological advantages. Their conclusions challenged fundamental assumptions about the air war in the Pacific. The Corsair, initially dismissed by Japanese intelligence as another crude American attempt to build fighters like bombers, possessed performance characteristics that exceeded Japanese aircraft in crucial areas. Maximum level speed at altitude approached 450 miles per hour, nearly 60 miles per hour faster than the Zero's best performance. Rate of climb exceeded 3,000 feet per minute, enabling American pilots to escape unfavorable engagements through vertical maneuvers that Japanese aircraft could not match. Most significantly, the Corsair's structural strength permitted diving speeds that allowed American pilots to build energy advantages that could be converted into tactical superiority through proper timing. But aircraft performance alone could not explain the comprehensive nature of American tactical success. Boyington's leadership style, as reported by captured American aircrew from other units, emphasized coordinated team tactics that maximized individual aircraft capabilities while minimizing Japanese advantages in maneuverability and pilot experience. The Black Sheep operated as a single fighting unit rather than a collection of individual pilots, with predetermined tactical roles that enabled rapid response to changing combat situations. The psychological impact of these repeated defeats began to manifest in ways that concerned Japanese commanders more than the immediate tactical losses. Veteran pilots who had dominated Pacific skies since Pearl Harbor reported dreams about encounters with the distinctive inverted gull-wing silhouette of the Corsair. Formation leaders found themselves modifying mission profiles to avoid areas where Marine Fighting Squadron 214 was known to operate. Most troubling, replacement pilots arriving from training bases in Japan carried rumors about the invincibility of American fighters that undermined confidence before they flew their first combat missions. On December 4th, Boyington achieved his 27th confirmed victory during an engagement over Bougainville that demonstrated the tactical evolution that had made the Black Sheep the most feared fighter unit in the Pacific theater. Leading 16 Corsairs on a bomber escort mission, Boyington encountered 32 Japanese fighters attempting to intercept the American formation. Instead of engaging in conventional dogfighting, the American pilots executed a coordinated attack that struck the Japanese formation simultaneously from multiple directions, creating confusion that prevented effective defensive response. The engagement lasted 12 minutes. When it concluded, 6 Japanese aircraft had been destroyed, including 2 by Boyington himself, while the American bombers completed their mission without interference. The tactical precision demonstrated by the Black Sheep during this engagement reflected months of combat experience distilled into fighting techniques that exploited every advantage American aircraft and training could provide. Japanese operational analysis of the December 4th engagement revealed tactical coordination that suggested American fighter doctrine had evolved beyond individual pilot skill towards systematic approaches that treated air combat as a team sport rather than a collection of individual duels. Radio intercepts indicated that American pilots communicated continuously during engagements, sharing tactical information and coordinating attacks with precision that enabled them to concentrate firepower against selected targets while maintaining mutual support throughout the battle. The implications extended beyond immediate tactical considerations. If a single American squadron could achieve such comprehensive dominance over experienced Japanese pilots flying proven aircraft, what would happen when similar tactics were adopted by other American units throughout the Pacific? The strategic balance that had maintained Japanese air superiority since the war began was shifting in ways that threatened the entire defensive perimeter that protected Japan's conquest. By December 20th, intelligence reports indicated that Boyington's confirmed kill total had reached 28 aircraft, matching the record established by Captain Eddie Rickenbacker during the First World War. More ominously for Japanese strategic planning, Marine Fighting Squadron 214's tactical methods were being studied and copied by other American fighter units throughout the Pacific Theater. The techniques that had made Boyington's squadron invincible were becoming standard doctrine for American fighter operations. The terror that Japanese pilots had begun to associate with the Black Sheep extended beyond rational tactical analysis. Boyington had become a symbol of American air superiority that challenged fundamental assumptions about Japanese martial superiority and pilot training methods that had dominated military aviation doctrine for decades. The psychological warfare implications of his success created doubt within Japanese fighter units that tactical countermeasures alone could not address. January 3, 1944, began with weather conditions that veteran Pacific aviators recognized as perfect for long-range fighter operations. Unlimited visibility extended beyond 150 miles, with scattered cumulus clouds at 8,000 feet, providing tactical cover for high-altitude approaches. The morning briefing at Bougainville had identified a high-priority target, Japanese shipping concentrated near Rabaul, protected by what intelligence estimated as moderate fighter opposition. Boyington would lead 20 Corsairs on a fighter sweep designed to clear enemy aircraft from the area before Marine dive bombers arrived to attack the convoy. The formation departed Torokina airfield at 0715 hours, climbing steadily through crystalline air that revealed every detail of the Solomon Islands chain stretching northward toward the Japanese stronghold at Rabaul. Boyington's tactical radio crackled with routine position reports as the Black Sheep established their cruising formation, 4 divisions of 4 aircraft each, separated by altitude and bearing to provide mutual support while maximizing visual coverage of the surrounding airspace. At 28,000 feet, the Corsairs leveled off for the 200-mile transit to their target area. What Allied intelligence had failed to detect was the presence of 40 Japanese fighters that had staged through Rabaul during the previous evening, representing elements from 3 separate kokutai assembled specifically to counter the growing threat posed by Marine Fighting Squadron 214. Japanese commanders, analyzing weeks of combat reports that detailed systematic defeats at the hands of Boyington's squadron, had committed unprecedented resources to a single engagement designed to break American fighter dominance in the Northern Solomons. The first contact occurred at 0847 hours, as Lieutenant Robert McClurg spotted aircraft climbing from Rabaul's multiple airfields. "Skipper, Bandits 12 o'clock, Angels 25, climbing fast." McClurg's voice carried the controlled tension that characterized combat veterans who had survived months of aerial warfare. Boyington acknowledged the sighting while scanning the horizon ahead, counting enemy aircraft as they emerged from the haze that perpetually shrouded Rabaul's volcanic peaks. The tactical situation developed rapidly as both formations maneuvered for advantage. Japanese pilots, flying in 3 separate groups totaling 40 fighters, attempted to establish the altitude advantage that their tactical doctrine demanded for successful interception. The lead formation, composed of 12 Zeros from the veteran 204th Kokutai, climbed aggressively toward 32,000 feet, seeking the energy advantage that would enable diving attacks against the American formation. Boyington recognized the tactical trap immediately. Japanese strategy relied on forcing American aircraft into defensive maneuvering that would negate the Corsairs' advantages in speed and diving performance. Instead of accepting the enemy's tactical framework, Boyington made the decision that would define his final combat engagement, a head-on attack that would exploit American firepower advantages while preventing Japanese formations from achieving coordinated positioning. "Black sheep, we're going through them," Boyington transmitted, pushing his Corsair into a shallow dive that built airspeed rapidly while maintaining enough altitude to retain energy for subsequent maneuvers. The formation followed in line abreast formation, 20 aircraft presenting a wall of firepower that could deliver 12,000 rounds per minute of 50 caliber ammunition against any Japanese formation that accepted the challenge of a frontal engagement. The collision of American and Japanese tactical philosophies occurred at 26,000 feet above the Bismarck Sea, with closure rates exceeding 700 miles per hour as 40 aircraft converged in the clear morning air. Boyington's guns opened at 800 yards, his tracers reaching across empty space to bracket the lead Zero's engine compartment. The Japanese pilot, committed to his own attack run, returned fire with 20mm cannon and 7.7mm machine guns, creating a deadly crossfire that lasted 3 seconds before the aircraft passed through each other's formation. The Zero that had engaged Boyington directly exploded under the impact of armor-piercing incendiary rounds that penetrated its unarmored fuel tank, creating a fireball that marked Boyington's 28th confirmed victory. But the tactical success came at a cost that would alter the trajectory of Marine Fighting Squadron 214's operational history. Multiple Japanese aircraft, converging from different directions, had established firing positions against American aircraft that were committed to straight-line attack profiles with limited maneuvering options. 20mm cannon shells from a Zero attacking from Boyington's port quarter struck his Corsair's engine compartment, penetrating the R-2800 cylinder heads and severing oil lines that fed the massive radial engine. Coolant temperature gauges climbed rapidly into redline ranges as the Pratt & Whitney began consuming itself, internal friction generating heat that would destroy the engine within minutes. Black smoke poured from the cowling, reducing forward visibility and creating a trail that marked Boyington's position for every Japanese pilot in the engagement area. The tactical situation deteriorated rapidly as Boyington's damaged aircraft lost power and altitude, becoming vulnerable to follow-up attacks from Japanese fighters that had broken off their engagements with other American aircraft to concentrate on the disabled formation leader. Standard procedure called for immediate withdrawal to friendly territory, but Boyington's engine was failing too rapidly to maintain altitude for the 200-mile flight back to Bougainville. Lieutenant Stan Bailey, flying wing position on Boyington throughout the engagement, moved his Corsair to provide defensive cover as his squadron commander's aircraft descended through 20,000 feet in a controlled glide toward the ocean surface. Bailey's tactical radio carried urgent position reports to the remaining Black Sheep aircraft, coordinating defensive maneuvers designed to protect Boyington's withdrawal while preventing Japanese pilots from achieving favorable attack positions. The engagement continued as Boyington's Corsair descended through 15,000 feet, its one milling propeller creating drag that shortened his gliding range with every 1,000 feet of altitude lost. Japanese pilots, recognizing the tactical opportunity presented by a disabled American formation leader, pressed their attacks despite defensive fire from escorting Corsairs that had reorganized to provide maximum protection for their commander. At 8,000 feet, with his engine temperature gauges indicating imminent mechanical failure, Boyington made the decision that would end his combat career, a forced landing in enemy-controlled waters rather than attempting to stretch his glide toward friendly territory. The Corsair's robust construction, designed to absorb carrier landing impacts and combat damage, enabled a survivable water landing that left Boyington conscious but trapped in rapidly sinking aircraft 20 miles northeast of Cape St. George. The rescue attempt lasted 47 minutes, with Black Sheep aircraft maintaining defensive coverage, while Boyington struggled free from his cockpit and inflated his life raft in seas that Japanese patrol boats were already moving to investigate. Radio transmissions coordinated between American fighters and air-sea rescue units based at Bougainville. But the tactical situation prevented successful extraction of the downed pilot from waters the Japanese forces controlled. At 11:37 hours, Boyington disappeared from visual contact as Japanese patrol boats reached his position. The Black Sheep, low on fuel after nearly 4 hours of combat operations, were forced to withdraw toward Bougainville, leaving their commander in enemy hands. The tactical victory, 6 Japanese aircraft destroyed against 1 American loss, could not compensate for the strategic implications of losing the pilot who had become synonymous with American fighter superiority in the Pacific theater. The capture of Major Gregory Boyington marked the end of an era in Pacific air warfare, removing from combat the tactical innovator whose methods had fundamentally altered the balance of power in aerial engagements throughout the Solomon Islands. His 28 confirmed victories represented more than statistical achievement. They embodied a transformation in American fighter doctrine that would influence air combat tactics for the remainder of the war and beyond. The interrogation room at Ofuna Prisoner of War Camp, 40 miles south of Tokyo, contained nothing but a wooden table, 2 chairs, and the accumulated weight of 20 months in captivity. Major Gregory Boyington, his flight suit long since replaced by the coarse cotton uniform issued to Allied prisoners, sat across from Commander Yoshio Tsunoda of the Imperial Japanese Navy Intelligence Service. The questions had remained consistent throughout his imprisonment: tactical procedures, aircraft specifications, squadron organization, and most persistently, the methods that had enabled a single American fighter unit to achieve such devastating effectiveness against experienced Japanese pilots. Tsunoda had studied captured American training manuals, analyzed gun camera footage from Japanese fighters that had survived encounters with Marine Fighting Squadron 214, and interviewed dozens of pilots who had faced Boyington's tactical innovations. The intelligence officer understood aircraft performance parameters, pilot training methodologies, and operational doctrine with expertise that reflected 2 decades of professional military aviation experience. What he could not comprehend was how American fighter tactics had evolved so rapidly from the defensive formations that had characterized early Pacific air combat to the coordinated offensive systems that had dominated Japanese air operations throughout the Central Solomons. The war beyond Ofuna's barbed wire perimeter had continued without Boyington's participation, but intelligence reports filtering through Japanese command channels confirmed that his tactical methods had spread throughout American fighter units across the Pacific theater. Marine Fighting Squadron 215, commanded by Major Robert Hansen, had adopted Black Sheep tactics to achieve 25 confirmed victories in 17 days of combat over Rabaul. Navy Fighter Squadron VF-17, flying Corsairs from land bases in the northern Solomons, had destroyed 76 Japanese aircraft in 76 days using formations and attack procedures pioneered by Boyington's squadron. The transformation extended beyond immediate tactical applications. American pilot training programs at bases throughout the continental United States had incorporated lessons learned from Black Sheep combat experience, teaching replacement aviators the coordinated fighting techniques that had proven so effective against Japanese opposition. Fighter squadrons arriving in the Pacific during 1944 carried tactical knowledge that reflected months of analysis focused on optimizing Corsair performance, characteristics against known Japanese aircraft capabilities, and pilot training methods. August 15, 1945, arrived at Ofuna with the silence that characterized significant historical moments before their implications became clear. The routine of prisoner life, morning assembly, work details, evening roll call, continued without obvious change, but Japanese guards displayed behavioral patterns that suggested major developments beyond the prison compound walls. Radio transmissions, normally restricted to administrative communications, carried voices that spoke with urgency and finality that transcended routine military correspondence. The announcement reached Allied prisoners through whispered conversations that spread through barracks designed to prevent organized communication. Japan had surrendered unconditionally to Allied forces, ending 6 years of global conflict that had transformed military aviation from biplane fighters to jet-powered aircraft capable of speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour. The war that had begun with horse cavalry charges and ended with atomic weapons had concluded without Boyington's participation in the victory he had helped create. Liberation came on August 29th with the arrival of American personnel who documented prisoner conditions, collected intelligence information, and began the complex process of repatriating Allied military personnel who had survived months or years of Japanese captivity. Boyington, weighing 30 pounds less than his pre-capture condition, required medical evaluation before transport to facilities equipped to address the nutritional and psychological effects of extended imprisonment under conditions that violated international agreements governing prisoner treatment. The medal ceremony at the White House on October 5, 1945, took place in the Oval Office, with President Harry Truman presenting the Medal of Honor to Major Gregory Boyington in recognition of extraordinary heroism and conspicuous gallantry above and beyond the call of duty. The citation detailed Boyington's tactical leadership, personal courage, and inspirational effect on subordinate personnel during combat operations that had fundamentally altered the strategic balance in Pacific air warfare. But the true measure of Boyington's impact extended beyond individual recognition to systemic changes in American military aviation that would influence combat operations for decades beyond the conclusion of World War II. The tactical innovations pioneered by Marine Fighting Squadron 214 had established principles of coordinated fighter operations that became standard doctrine for jet aircraft engaged in subsequent conflicts from Korea to Vietnam. The emphasis on mutual support, energy management, and exploitation of aircraft performance advantages became foundational concepts in pilot training programs that produced aviators capable of maintaining American air superiority through technological and operational evolution. The psychological transformation proved equally significant. Japanese military aviation, which had dominated Pacific skies through superior pilot training and aircraft design optimized for individual combat skills, had been systematically defeated by American tactical methods that treated air combat as team warfare, requiring coordination and discipline rather than individual heroics. The cultural implications resonated through post-war Japanese aviation development, influencing aircraft design philosophy and pilot training methodology in ways that reflected lessons learned from encounters with American fighter formations led by commanders like Boyington. Statistical analysis of Pacific air combat during the period from September 1943 through January 1944 revealed the strategic significance of Boyington's tactical innovations. American fighter squadrons operating under doctrinal principles established by Marine Fighting Squadron 214 achieved kill ratios that exceeded 10-to-1 against Japanese opposition, compared to approximate parity during earlier phases of the Pacific Campaign. The transformation from defensive to offensive air operations enabled American forces to establish and maintain air superiority that proved decisive in subsequent amphibious operations throughout the Central Pacific. The influence extended beyond World War II into the jet age, where American fighter tactics developed during propeller-driven combat proved adaptable to aircraft capable of supersonic flight. The emphasis on coordinated formations, energy management, and exploitation of performance advantages became fundamental principles that guided American fighter development through the Korean conflict, where F-86 Sabre pilots achieved favorable exchange rates against MiG-15 aircraft flown by experienced Chinese and Soviet aviators, using tactics derived from lessons learned in Pacific combat. Boyington's personal story concluded with civilian life that reflected the complex transition faced by combat veterans adapting to peacetime society. His memoir, published in 1958, documented the tactical evolution that had transformed American fighter aviation while providing insight into the psychological demands placed on military personnel who bore responsibility for life and death decisions in aerial combat. The book became required reading at military academies and flight training schools, ensuring that future generations of aviators understood the human dimension of technological warfare. The legacy transcended individual achievement to represent fundamental changes in military aviation that established American air superiority as a defining characteristic of modern warfare. From the clear skies over the Solomon Islands, where 28 Japanese aircraft fell to a single Marine pilot, emerged tactical principles that would guide American fighter operations through conflicts spanning the remainder of the 20th century and beyond, testament to innovations born from courage, leadership, and the relentless pursuit of victory against determined opposition.